everybody, welcome back to Planet Coaster and to the project Occasional 2. In the last episode we built a gathering hall inside the factory. Today we are adding what truly defines a factory, machines that produce, something. I've decided on 2 large blocks placed in the center of the room, but before we get to those, there's still some scenery missing on one of the walls, and we need a decorated entry point for the coaster to enter the factory. And of course that window ledge needs proper support so the whole structure doesn't collapse when a factory worker walks across it. You can see there's quite a bit to do and I'm juggling between different tasks on this wall. Speaking of which, I'm also using a lamp from the latest of the Planet Coaster expansion packs. These will be super useful once we get to the fairy tale section of the park. For now, I'm using them sparingly in the factory. So the coaster entrance into the factory. Naturally, we need a bunch of pipes and gears here. I also want to set up a small workstation. After all, people working here need a surface for paperwork and such. Oh, here's an idea for a future Planet Coaster expansion. Chairs. I'm using the sofa and the wooden bench, but I haven't seen any chairs that would fit a dining table or a workspace. Scenery objects would be enough place. They don't need to be path-only items. Back to the entrance. I'm finally using open pipes with steam effects. I feel like I've been too cautious with this effect so far. We're in the steampunk area. Steam should be a central element, right? At least I managed to create a nice texture effect with the ventilation grates on the metal wall. But before we get to the 2 machines, let me take a quick break. It's time for the wonderful Planet Coaster music. And yes, it's the soundtrack from the first game. Be right back. here I am again. The machines are already built and now I'm working on smaller details like the ceiling structure and the exterior. I've decided to keep most of the ceiling flat. My plan is to let the mountain cover the upper section so that it looks like the factory is built into the mountain and create a small exit point for the coaster. So the coaster will pass through the ceiling into an outdoor area. I could have raised the ceiling even higher, but then the building would have become very large. Let's just say the guests get a unique experience this way. Of course, daylight will stream through these openings. Curious to see how that looks into the cinematic shots. Anyway, the two machines are in place. They produce, well, something, I'm sure, even if I don't quite know what yet. But they are big, they are bulky, and they have filled the space. They also look kind of dangerous, so I had to fence them off for safety. Alright then, let's take a look at today's progress in the cinematic shots. In the next episode I'll tackle the various side rooms of the factory. Until then, thanks so much for watching and see you all in the next episode of Occasional 2.